Hi folks, with Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio no pictures live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the misinformation claims being made by the globalist media and propaganda outlets, and of course by the governments, all the Western governments that are controlled by the globalists, which is pretty much all of them, is that there's masses of jobs being created in the West, and both in terms of the number of jobs, which is allegedly huge, but also there's an incredible skill shortage. Now these skill shortages are in the areas, so we're told, of engineers, rocket scientists, doctors, etc. And we can only find these very first world type skills. We can only find them in illiterate peasant third world countries. Only those illiterate peasant third world countries have these very first world skills. Somehow is how it supposedly works. Is that it? Have I got that? So now these are grotesque untruths of the first magnitude. But nonetheless, that's the propaganda line that's going on. There's a worker shortage and simultaneously a skills shortage, and only illiterate third world peasants at that can fill these jobs. So let's just have a look at that. Is there, in fact, a huge number of new jobs being generated in the West, Australia, Britain, America? Is there a huge number of new jobs being generated, as in demand for people to work in services, industries, or any other job for that matter? Is there, and then are any of those jobs uniquely skilled, and can those skills be found only in third world countries and not in first world countries? Because the emphasis is on bringing in people who are black and brown, not bringing in people who are skilled from other first world countries. In fact, it's much easier to get a visa to come to a first world country if you're a black or brown illiterate peasant than it is if you're a first world person with recognized qualifications, experience, and speak the language and could fit into the culture almost instantly. It's much harder for those sort of people. So I've spoken to people in France and Germany and so on, and recently attended a international trade event where I was talking to people who from places in like Spain, France, Germany, that sort of thing, Belgium, where they were saying, why is it so hard to get into Australia as an immigrant, as a skilled immigrant? Why is it that Australia pretends to cry out for, so there's this shortage, we need people, come to Australia, when here's someone that speaks very good English, they've got first world technical qualifications, job experience, they tick every box twice over for what you would want as a migrant, but they can't get, somehow they just don't quite seem to make the points, can't quite seem to get there. But the illiterate peasant from wherever, brown or black peasant from wherever, can just waltz straight in the door, and it's got an army of human rights lawyers to argue their case if they have any trouble doing it. So clearly we've got a very, very broken system here, one that's shot through with propaganda, globalist lies, globalist treacheries, globalist untruths, and of course the misinformation. Now, are all these new jobs being generated? Well, they're not. That's a lie. But the type of jobs that are being generated are different, and that's really where we need to go first off. Where I would argue in the West, we're returning to a system of serfdom, as the elites have detached themselves from the people. They no longer represent the people. Democracy is some sort of a joke. We're going to share power with those bums. So it's returning to the, if you like, the pre. I would argue sort of pre-1820s Western style democracy, where you've got sort of 10% or less of the population that have any sort of say in the government and the formation, and then you've got a few thousand people. Say in Britain, with a population of 9 million, there was somewhere in the region of 3,000 to 4,000 people that made all the decisions about everything. So you're looking at a tiny proportion. I think we're returning to that. I think there was a broad-based middle-class economies in the West with a high degree of participation of the populace, certainly higher than ever been in history. That's all now being dismantled. And with it, the sort of relationship between the moneyed classes, the decision-making classes, the control classes, the power class, call them what you will. It doesn't really matter. I mean, we could even call them the capitalist class because they'll be the only ones that will be allowed to own anything. The rest of us will own nothing and be happy. And so we're returning effectively to a serf feudalism type situation. So the sort of jobs being created have changed. It's not that there's lots of new jobs being created. There isn't. In fact, it's the opposite, I would argue. In Australian economy, the last 12 months, the economy's grown by less than 1%. And whatever economic growth has existed, it goes in the offshore purchasing of Australian residential real estate, so that the inflation of a non-productive asset such as real estate, because it produces nothing, the non-productive asset, that is now being included or counted as economic growth. So if we subtract that artificial growth, bullshit growth, then the economy's gone backwards over that time. Hardly surprising, given that over the last few years, the rents and food and the essentials of life, of the prices, energy, have gone through the roof. So people's income is being taken up in paying for the absolute essentials of life, rather than the discretionary items such as discretionary consumer goods, or going out to dinner or something like that, vacations and the like. So that sort of expenditure in discretionary type stuff really has gone down. And with that has been a shrinking of overall economic activity. Well, whether that's consumer activity or productive activity, such as making things and selling them, that's almost beside the point in this equation. But it's gone backwards nonetheless. So there are no new jobs being generated, and any jobs that are being generated are far fewer. But there are different types of jobs being generated, and when I say different types of jobs, I don't mean are they in the service industry or low-paid retail jobs and those sort of things. There is, most of the new jobs being created are the lowest paid jobs. The better paid jobs are actually shrinking in number, not increasing. And wherever there is a growth in the number, say junior to intermediate level engineers, wherever there is a growth area, then the effect of the way the employment economy is working these days is to dampen down the pay. So you can have a fully qualified bridge building engineer with maybe between 5 and 10 years experience. So he'd be sort of, he'd be leading a team of junior trainee type level engineers. He'd be building multi-million-dollar bridges, that sort of stuff, and roads and the like. He'll be getting paid, say, 1.6 times the average wage, whereas a globalist ideological facilitator, such as the DEI coordinator at the local office, the DEI coordinator or the HR director or something, somebody like that in the HR and DEI affirmative action department will be paid 3 times, 4 times the average wage. So if you're a propaganda social engineer facilitator in this new world order, you're paid much more than the productive person being the engineer. So there's been a big change in emphasis on employment and who gets paid a lot and who doesn't, how much this is. So you can have somebody who's a gender studies graduate come out, maybe they've been out in the workforce or even just out of college for a year or two, and they can walk straight into a job, even though they're still in their early to mid-20s. They can walk straight into a job purely on the basis of their credentials as an ideological or social engineer fanatic. They can walk into a job that pays 3-4 times the average wage. That's the insanity of today's. But coming back to the different structure and nature of jobs, there's a say you work full-time at the local grocery store, as an example. Now, the way full-time used to work is you would start your job at, you'd start work at, 8 o'clock in the morning, and you'd have a 45 minutes for lunch, 15 minutes coffee break or something like that, then you finish at 5, and that's not how things work anymore. The amount of people that have those rosters are really the maybe the store manager might have that, or the assistant store manager. This could be a grocery store that might employ 50 people, 100 people, whatever. But instead they'll start work. This is the new roster. They'll start work at say 6 in the morning, and they'll work 4 hours till 10 o'clock. Then they'll have 4 hours off, where they presumably have to go home or sit around. Then they're brought back to start work at 2, and they'll have to work till 6. So they get 2 hits of 4 hours, which means they get no actual breaks during the course of their work. So it's these sort of jobs, the changed conditions and circumstances and rosters and hours, and that also jobs being divided up. So instead of one person working 40-hour or 38, 39-hour week or whatever, then they're splitting that up into 2 or 3 jobs of say 15 hours each. So this is how the structure of employment is changing, and the benefits such as accrued leave or accrued vacation time, or all these sort of things are also being reduced and changed. Now the idea is in these jobs they can slot anyone into it. Any monkey could do it type thing. So you're also in direct, local people are in direct competition then with folks who are being imported. Now, because the rate of pay and the cost of living and the changed dynamics there, and the fact that the working people have been completely abandoned in the West by the elite globalist controlled decision-making class, then the idea of improving your life or making your life better or improving the purchasing power of your paycheck, that's just gone out of the window. These people just don't care about that anymore. They don't have a problem with that, because if their cost of living increases, then they can just increase their salary, increase their income, to equal or exceed the new costs they have to meet. They're not going backwards. The rest of the populace are. So because of that, now the cost of living going through the roof, then the way people live has to change, assuming they fit into this new paradigm, of course. And that change is living communally. Maybe you live intergenerationally. Now, as the West became wealthy, families splintered into smaller and smaller groups, unlike in poor countries where they couldn't afford to do that, so they had to live communally in order to get by. And this is where the migrants coming in have this benefit over the local population. The third world peasant migrants coming in, and Indians as an example, and others too. It's nothing to see 3 or 4 generations living in the same house, which means they can divide up the responsibilities. People can go out to work at shitty jobs that don't pay much, because the children, they can still have children because the grandparents or whatever look after the children and keep the home fires burning and make sure dinner's on the table when they get back. So the other people can specialize in working at these lower paid shitty jobs, or they can live in mass groups. It's nothing to see in a compact 2-bedroom apartment to see 16 or 17 Pakistanis living there. Now, it's meant to be illegal, it's meant to be, and that shouldn't be allowed and all this sort of thing. But the authorities at every level are just looking the other way on this. So these people have an advantage. They can apply for and can get by on working these jobs with outrageous conditions, even in things like, say, pizza delivery or those sort of jobs, which have exploded in terms of numbers. They're available to people. Have to be on 1 hour or less than 1 hour standby. So if you want to work there, then they don't give you a roster saying we'll give you 20 hours or 30 hours, 40 hours, whatever, delivering pizzas or making pizzas, whatever it might be. We only want you when the demand is high. So if we suddenly get hit with a number of orders for 100 pizzas each or something like that, and we suddenly need people, we'll give you 30 minutes notice, 15 minutes notice that we're going to need you, and you have to be down here, and whoever comes first gets the gig. That sort of stuff. That's now the new paradigm for the sort of jobs that are being created and the conditions that go with those jobs. So why is mass migration needed? Well, it's not needed. There aren't new jobs being created. That's bullshit. There aren't an increase in the number of jobs being created. That's bullshit too. There's massive subdivision of what were once 40-hour-a-week jobs, and also there's a changed set of working conditions, which means only people who can live communally or in a, again, the 17 people to a 2-bedroom apartment or 10 people to a 1-bedroom apartment, only people that can live that way with that sort of level of pooled resources can work in those sort of environments, because economically they have to live their life in a certain way that allows them to get by on incomes of that sort. Now, the reality should be that those sort of subdivision of jobs and cost of living impact should be dealt with by governments, but the globalist controlled governments aren't doing. In fact, they're actively and aggressively pursuing this, and the ultimate outcome of this, and it's already something that's in motion now, the ultimate outcome of this is that we will, other than the small micro, 1 in every 500, 1 in every 1,000 people, other than those, the rest of us will be reduced to feudal or a modern form of feudal serfdom. And there's no doubt about that in my view. You've been with Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for listening.